Welcome everyone. Today we'll talk about how your strength is a scar that learned to look useful. I'm going to start off with a quote by Soren Kierkegaard, who said, "The most common form of despair is not being who you are." In this essay we'll cover how the brain doesn't break, but it builds the wrong person, how you solve the problem that no longer exists and you're still solving it. The decision left the room a long time ago, and you're not the armor, but you're what it was built to hide. The armor that doesn't live in your mind, but it lives in your jaw, where this all breaks down, and the only experiment worth running first as an actionable step after listening to this video. So let's dive deep into this. You are in a conversation and someone asks if you're okay. Nothing dramatic happened. They just noticed something. And before they finish the sentence, you have already said yes. And you meant it. And also you didn't. And you moved on because this is what you do. You are the person who handles things. The one who stays composed. The one who does not ask for much, does not break easily, and seems to carry difficulty without visible costs. The people around you call this strength, but you call it strength too. It is worth asking where it came from, not to diminish it, not to turn everything into a trauma narrative, but because strength that was built in safety and strength that was built under pressure are not the same thing. They just look identical from the outside. One was chosen and the other one was constructed under specific conditions in response to a specific environment, and then never fully examined after these conditions changed. That distinction is the entire point of this essay. Chapter number 1. The brain doesn't break. It builds the wrong person. Start at root. When a person experiences sustained psychological pressure, whether that is instability, emotional neglect, environments where vulnerability was punished, or simply the chronic experience of needing to perform in order to belong, the brain does not collapse, but it adapts. And it is extraordinarily good at adapting. The prefrontal cortex begins to organize identity around what works. Not what feels natural, not what is authentic, but what works. If self-sufficiency kept you safe, the brain encodes self-sufficiency as identity. If emotional detachment reduced pain, detachment becomes personality. And if high performance earned you the love that should have been unconditional, achievement becomes the architecture of self-worth. Research on neurobiological development in the context of early stress confirms that the brain's primary job is survival coherence and not authentic self-expression. It builds whoever you need to be, and it does so completely, so efficiently that the constructed self and the real self become indistinguishable from the inside. Think of someone who learned very early that the adults around them were unreliable. Not cruel necessarily, just unavailable in the moments that mattered. That child did not decide to become self-sufficient. They noticed, gradually and then permanently, that needing things created pain and not needing things reduced it. So they just stopped needing things altogether. 20 years later, they are in a relationship with someone who genuinely wants to show up for them, and they still cannot ask for help. Not because they are damaged, but because the brain solved the problem once and never received the signal that the problem had changed. That is what a survival identity is, a correct solution running in the wrong era. Chapter number 2. You solve the problem that no longer exists, and you're still solving it. There is a room most people live in without realizing it. Not the literal one, a neurological one. It is the room where the original threat lived. And the brain, having organized itself around that room, continues to navigate every new space as if it were the same room. The cruel irony is that the room trains you to stay. Every time you feel the impulse to be seen and respond by closing, you are reinforcing the neural pathway that says openness is dangerous. Every time you feel the pull towards asking for help and override it with self-sufficiency, we are practicing the old solution. Research on persistent identity threat found that when people encounter situations that contradict their established self-concept, the brain activates suppression rather than updating its model. You are not evaluating the new situation on its own terms, but you are filtering it through the architecture of the old one. You are standing in a new room, but seeing the old one. Not because you're broken, but because the brain is doing exactly what it was built to do, maintaining coherence, confirming its existing model, protecting you from the cost of being wrong about who you are. The armor does not feel like armor, it feels like you. Your directness, your independence, your ability to stay calm when everything is falling apart. These have been present for so long that you cannot remember who you were before them. But here is what this actually means. You have been composing a performance so consistently that you forgot it started as a performance. Chapter number 3. The decision left the room a long time ago. If the brain builds a protected identity under pressure, and if that identity becomes structurally embedded over time, then the solution is not to simply decide to be different. The decision has to reach something that is no longer making conscious decisions. This is what almost all advice about breaking patterns misses entirely. Defense mechanisms are not flexible coping tools you can consciously override. A large-scale study published in Nature found that they become deeply embedded in behavioral and cognitive processing in ways the person remains largely unaware of. You are not choosing to be guarded. The brain automated that response a long time ago, when it was the right call, and automation does not check whether the original threat is still present. The person who learned that relying on others leads to disappointment will underutilize every single relationship, even when the people around them are genuinely trustworthy. The person who learned that weakness invites attack will struggle to ask for help at exactly the moments when asking would change everything. The person who learned that worth is earned through output will keep performing long after the performance is no longer necessary and feel inexplicably hollow when it stops. All of these are not character flaws. They are perfect adaptations running in the wrong context. And the most uncomfortable part is this: you will defend them because they worked, because they are familiar, because taking them off feels like freedom, feels less like freedom and more like standing somewhere with no walls, in a weather you have never tested yourself against. Chapter number 4. You are not your armor, you are what it was built to hide. That sentence is not asking you to become softer or more vulnerable in the ways the internet recommends. It is asking something more specific. It is asking you to consider the possibility that the qualities you had to build in difficult conditions are not the ceiling of who you are. They are the floor. And the question worth sitting with now is not how to dismantle what you built, but what you would build on top of it if you were building from choice, and rather than necessity. Jung called this individuation, the slow lifelong process of becoming who you actually are rather than who circumstances required you to be. Not a single realization, not a breakthrough moment, a direction, a long orientation away from the constructed self and towards whatever was underneath before the construction began. It starts with noticing, not analyzing, not reconstructing, just the quiet, honest observation of which parts of how you move through the world are responses you choose, and which ones are reflexes that choose themselves in conditions you no longer live in. You probably already know someone who never made this distinction, who ran the same relationship pattern across 3 decades and 4 different people and called it bad luck, who achieved everything they set out to achieve and could not understand why it felt like nothing, who was described by everyone who loved them as strong and died tired in a way nobody could quite name. The distinction matters, and it is not too late to make it. Chapter number 4. The armor doesn't live in your mind, it lives in your jaw. The armor does not live in your thoughts. It lives in the jaw that tightens before a difficult conversation. The chest that closes slightly when someone gets too close. The specific exhaustion that follows sustained performance. Not the tiredness of effort, but a deeper depletion of maintaining a self that requires a constant low-level vigilance to hold together. Peter Levine's work on somatic experiencing documented what trauma-informed research has confirmed repeatedly. Protective adaptations are stored in the nervous system, not just in the cognitive patterns. The body learned the defense before the mind named it, which means that intellectual understanding of the armor, however accurate and however deep, does not fully reach the place where the armor actually lives. This is why smart people can spend years understanding their patterns without substantially changing them. The insight arrives at the level of thought. The pattern operates at the level of reflex. These are different systems. The gap between them is real, and closing it requires something different than understanding. It requires repeated, small, deliberate experiences of doing the thing the reflex would normally prevent. Not a transformation, an experiment. Run enough times to generate new evidence. Now we're going to talk about how this framework breaks this down, and we'll start with blind spot number 1, which is not everything is armor, and understanding can become one. The frame of "it's all a wound" can become its own destabilizing move, invalidating everything you built rather than doing the harder work of discernment. And for intellectually oriented people, it goes one level deeper. Analyzing the armor can become a substitute for removing it. Talking about the wound in precise psychological language creates this feeling of movement while keeping the experience at a safe distance. The insight is real. The protection it offers is also real. A starting point would be to ask one question about each quality you call a strength. Would I still want this if I had never needed it? If yes, it is probably yours. If uncertain, follow that. And if your self-understanding has deepened significantly, but your behavior has not shifted, ask honestly whether the insight has become its own comfort. Knowing why you do something is the beginning of change, but not the change itself. Blind spot number 2. Safety first, dismantling second. Attempting to remove the armor in an environment that is still genuinely unsafe will make things worse. The brain built the defenses for reasons. If those reasons are still partially present, taking down the protection is not growth. And the people around you complicate this further. Some of them chose you specifically because of the defended versions. Your self-sufficiency made you low maintenance. Your containment made you stable for them. But when you start changing, some will push back without knowing why. A good starting point for this one would be, before asking how to become less defended, ask 2 questions. First, is my current environment safe enough to be less defended in? And second, who responds with discomfort when I'm more uncertain and openly needy than usual? Both answers tell you what you're actually working with before the experiment begins. And blind spot number 3, the gap between knowing and changing is where most people stop. Structural change in deeply embedded neural patterns takes months, if not years, not weeks. The awareness comes faster than the change, and the gap between knowing and being different is where most people conclude nothing is shifting and then just quit. Progress here does not feel like transformation. It feels like a slightly different reflex in a moment you almost did not notice. A pause where there used to be an automatic response. A need stated plainly to someone who could actually meet it. Here, a good starting point would be to measure change in the right unit. Not do I feel different, but did I respond differently in that specific moment compared to a year ago? That granularity and specificity is not a consolation prize. It is the actual texture of how humans change. Anyone telling you otherwise is selling something. And now, chapter number 7, the only experiment worth running first, to implement this framework. This is not a change protocol, it is an observation exercise. The only goal is to begin seeing the armor in real time, because you cannot examine what you cannot first locate. Days 1 to 10, you need to map the activations. Each evening, keep your phone face down after 10 p.m. and spend 2 minutes before sleep replaying one moment from the day when you felt yourself close. Not dramatically, just a small familiar tightening that happens when someone gets too close, asks too much, or says something you did not plan to show. Do not analyze it yet. Just write one sentence, the trigger, what you did instead of what you felt. That is all. Then, days 11 to 20, find the original function. Now look back at the log. For each activation, ask not what caused it, but what it was protecting you from. Name that specific thing. Humiliation, rejection, being seen as someone who needs something. These are the oldest layers. The original reasons the armor was built. Most of them made complete sense when they were installed. The goal is not to judge them. It is to see them clearly enough to tell them apart from the present situation. And then days 21 to 30th, test one small opening. Now pick the low stakes activation from your log. In one situation this week, try a marginally smaller version of the usual response. Don't say no to the armor, just slightly less. One honest sentence where you would usually deflect. One admission of uncertainty where you would usually perform confidence. One moment of staying in the discomfort 2 seconds longer before closing. You are not trying to become a different person in 30 days. You are trying to generate one piece of behavioral evidence that the armor is a choice and not a fixed fact. You do not have to answer all of this today, but the strength was real. The survival was real. None of that needs to be taken from you. The only question worth sitting with now is whether the version of you that had to be built in the dark is the same version you would choose to build in the light. Thank you for listening to this video, and I'll see you in the next one.